I'm really, really honored to be here with Jeanine Fitzgerald. Jeanine, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for the pleasure.
I'll just say, to me, you were somebody who is a leader and who thinks outside the box. And that's selling you short. I mean, the reason I've gone through to different states to hear your point of view
Uh-huh.
is because anyone can say some of the things that you're saying intellectually, although I think you do it better. It's a different story to actually apply the principles that you talk about in terms of
Mhm.
honoring children in the school system.
Yeah.
People honor children the best they can, but I think on their own terms
Mhm.
and within the systems that they feel like they're allowed to do it. And you've somehow found a way to be so compatible with people who I know in school systems and in just systems of care in general, cultural systems. People seek you out for your advice and your thoughts, yet you you're your own independent thinker and you do things totally differently. If you didn't have I mean, if you were just someone hired, let's say, to do behavior consulting in my school district, and you said some
Yeah.
of the things that you said, people would say, yeah, but
Yeah. Right.
it'd be like a pain in the ass to them. So
Yeah.
that's my little intro to you. Maybe you could
Uh-huh.
tell people a little bit about your bio, and we'll get into all those things.
Yeah. It's pretty informal. I mean, well, I have pretty vast experience. I've been in the field for 43 years. Um, my work generally comes from just experience. So having lived life and trying to be a student of life, but basically, I spent those 43 years working with children with challenging behaviors. Um, and it sort of morphed over the years, and now it's become sort of international, doing a lot of speaking and keynoting and publishing of books. And we run in-depth programs. So if folks are interested in what I've discovered as a result of 37 years of international research and how that applies to our kids today in the United States, um, we have programs like Education with Insight, Parenting with Insight, Leadership with Insight. We're currently putting together All Needs Matter, which is looking at children with diagnosed disabilities from the lens of wholeness instead of the lens of deficit and disorder. And so basically, I have adopted two values that guide all the work that I do. And the first value is honoring, and the second is transformation. And so I just want to spend all the days of my life doing what I can to teach people the tools that they need so that they can transform their lives in the best possible ways. And what I found is if they have the tools that they're looking for, then they'll transport themselves to their level of success, which is different from a system defining success. Um, I don't believe that you're successful if you can pass tests and if you can, go on to a prestigious college and you get a good job. I don't define that personally as success, although I was in that mold when I was a kid, and it created all kinds of challenges. It's like that's not my level of my definition of success. Meaning in life is personally defined.
When I was
Uh,
in my early 20s, I remember having an epiphany that's not really one, it's sort of common sense.
mhm.
That was, whoa, I'm working in a school system now, and I'm just thinking education, if it means anything, is preparing kids, humans, to be part of this world. And
Right.
I feel like I'm doing the opposite.
Yeah.
And so everything that you just said seems to sound so good, seem so right. Yet I think and sometimes, maybe not anymore, but people often find themselves doing the opposite of what you're talking about and maybe
Yeah.
rationalizing it away.
And I think where we got caught in both early care and education and in education is that we moved away from standards. There's no doubt you need standards. But then it forces us, if we're going to develop standards, to consider what is quality. And I again think differently about quality. And so um, my benchmark is always excellence. It's not quality. Um, and just in working with a variety of different regulations, states. What I've figured out is a lot of the licensing requirements and a lot of the requirements of national associations are minimal standards of what they determine to be quality. But that doesn't mean that we can't exceed minimal standards. And when we are always in that pursuit of this thing called excellence, it becomes a lifelong process. It's an ongoing process. You never fully arrive. Therefore, you can't have a checklist that says we're a quality program, particularly a checklist that somebody, a self kind of generated checklist with money attached to it, because then you get false results. And so I've just lived in that for 43 years. And I look for excellence. So like, what is the best possible scenario at this moment in time, in this situation, for this child, for this group of children, and so, we went wrong when we started to look at standards in terms of checklist quality. And then what happened with that is standards became standardization. So it became a one size fits all. We have to have all these kids learning the same thing at the same time in the same way on the same day so that they can all pass the same test. And I think, despite the fact that we say we have a system of public education in the United States, we really don't. We have a system of for-profit education. And there's foundations, and there are organizations, groups of people that, interesting enough, probably have very little to no background in education, but realized that they could start to script tests and they could start to script curriculums and make a lot of money. And so it's a for-profit. It's not driven by the people. It's driven by corporations and foundations and folks that are very interested in their own bottom line. And so it developed a standardized system of one size fits all. And the problem is that there are two people alike. So that's a real problem.
I want to get into the way you've sort of started to ameliorate that. I mean, just by doing your own work. Let's just say you treat adults the same way that you talk about adults should be treating children, in that whatever it is, almost like a consumer in some way, because they're there to get your product. I don't know if I could think in business terms, but like you treat them as human beings worth teaching and meeting where they are. And so I've noticed that you might have someone like me, who I think of myself as somebody who wants to be in leadership, changing the way that people think about things, but maybe someone who's a little less ambitious, who feels stuck in a system. You also provide training and education for those adults. Likewise, you don't just preach the ways that people should be running a system, or the benchmarks that people should be using, but you have developed your own school, the Fitzgerald Institute. And so I'd love to get into, you tell me what you want to do first. I mean, we could talk about your philosophy and then talk about the school itself, but I want to make sure I get that in there.
Well, we could probably talk about those simultaneously, because obviously the philosophy is the foundation, the why.
If everything goes right,
school. So, when we started the school, it was 7 years ago now, and as I was going through school myself, I always had this dream, and it was a dream. It wasn't really a goal. It was just, maybe someday we could create something that made sense for the children that I was working with, or that I was seeing in my own classes early on in my career. The kids that were being put in the coat room back then, and the kids that were being denied recess, and the kids that were being sent home for 3 days on vacation, and the kids in my day, we had principals that paddled kids, the kids that were publicly humiliated in front of the rest of the school at the end of the day. And so it created a drive in me to think differently. Like, there's got to be a different way that we treat human beings. This is very similar to the way we treat animals, but people are different, and we should not be using, the traditional behavior management strategies of punishment and reward and praise, and all of those sorts of things. And so I had this thought as I was going through college to get my degrees in education, that maybe someday I would be able to start a school. And so the real motivation to start that school was my daughter giving birth to my first grandchild, and not wanting my grandchild to have to go through this scripted, there's smart kids and there's not so smart kids, and hopefully you fall in the smart kid group. And the systems of public humiliation that we're using now, like Dojo and things like that, where we publicly show how children are behaving. Like, I didn't want my grandkids to experience that. And so we created the school. It's called the Fitzgerald Community School. It was the Fitzgerald Institute until this week, but we rebranded this year. And we started that school with 5 children and just 1 educator. And we started off as a school that was based in project immersion, because my experience is that, projects, every child can find some way to contribute to a project. And so we started off as that, and we've evolved, and we're to the point now where our class size is 7 children to 1 teacher. And it will always stay that way. We're a small school model. We have over 50 something children at this point. Next year, in fact, next week, we're starting construction on additional classrooms, so that it's growing. But the ratio is 1 to 7, because that's what the research says. The quality of the relationship between teacher and student is really the sort of the crux of effective education. So I started to do a lot of neuroscientific research and talk to folks, really smart folks in neuroscience, and figure out, like, what does the brain truly need for optimal growth, optimal development, not just mastery of information, but true application to life. What does the brain need? And so we started to come up with, what would be our why? Why would somebody in their, late 50s take on the project of starting a school? Like, doesn't seem to make a whole bunch of sense, but it really did. So we sat down and we put together our why, and our why became honoring children, and honoring the folks that work with children, whether they're parents or whether they're professionals. And so our organizational chart is the inverse of most organizational charts. So we don't, like, we have a head of schools and we have an owner. I'm the owner. The head of school happens to be my daughter. But for us, what's at the top of our organizational chart is children, because that's why we're in business in the first place. And then it goes down in this shape. So the children are up the top here, and then it goes down like this. And on this side, we have the parents, and on this side, we have the professionals. And our children go into this sort of like funnel called education. And we are the supports to that. And we work together to hold the sides of the funnel together so that they get an effective education.
So this already sets you apart from the vast majority of schools in the country. It's
inverse. It's not, we don't run off the bureaucratic military approach, like there's a superintendent and then it all filters down and the superintendent reports to the governor, that then reports to the federal secretary of education. We put our children first. And so the concept became honoring. And from there, we developed the second foundation or anchor to the work that we do, which is empowerment. And then the third anchor to what we do is inclusion, full inclusion. So, I have a degree in special education, and I was taught that inclusion meant that children with disabilities could be educated with children without disabilities. I don't believe that's a good definition of inclusion. I've said for years, I think inclusion is, our definition of inclusion has to be much more inclusive. And so I look at it as a way to sort of conceptualize society. And it asks a lot of reflective questions, like whose needs are met and whose needs are denied, who's celebrated and who's oppressed, and when you get to the bigger picture like that and the bigger philosophy, you end up with a school that becomes what we have today. And that school is a place where, so I was there yesterday, and one of our 3-year-olds got in the car, and her mom is a teacher in a public school system. And I want to be clear, it's not about the people teaching within the system, it's the structure of the system itself.
Mhm.
There's incredibly wonderful people within the system that are doing honoring, as you said earlier, to the degree that they understand how to do that within the system they have to work with and still keep a job. Um, so this mom is an educator in a public school, and the first thing she said to me is, your parenting things are so helpful to me. She says it has shed so much light, not just on my parenting, but also on how I teach. And then her daughter, who's 3 years old, said something to her mom, and I didn't hear it. And she said, "Did you hear what she just said?" And I said, "No." And she said, she's sad right now because she doesn't want to leave her school. And so we hear those comments, like the kids are excited to be in that environment. And if you go on the website, you can see some of the testimonials of folks and what's being said there. So it's really based in, we're now a nature-based project immersion school. And every child has their own learning plan. They learn in their own way, which is doable when you have low ratios like we have. We don't do any testing. We don't do any grades because that's what the research says. There should be no homework until 5th grade because there's very little benefit. The research also says that grades actually create a culture where kids will only do what they need to get the grade that they're looking for, and they won't exceed that. It becomes a ceiling for kids. So we don't do any of that. Everything is demonstrated through projects, through discussion with kids. We do rubrics. We have rubrics, but we have discussions with kids. So as they're doing their work, we're asking them, like, what part of this are you finding easy? What part of this is challenging? How would you adjust it to make it something that's, more accessible for you? So it really takes a very different approach to education, which in my view and my background in education, as well as my background in mental health, what I've figured out is there's a difference between education and schooling.
I got to get to that difference. Can I
Yeah,
reflect a couple things first?
sure.
Just to get my mind straight. When it comes to empowerment, we like to say that we're empowering people. And like now I've said and you've said, and I'll just say a different way, people who are working within standard school systems are doing what they can to empower the students that they work with. But it's not meeting the need. It's not truly empowering every student that they work with to the extent that
Mhm.
they deserve it. You put that as a child is the priority.
Yeah.
And so the first part of the conversation always is prioritizing the child. So that, and then inclusion doesn't mean, so that's the major difference. And inclusion doesn't just mean, well, we have it set for people who learn in a standard way. So people who are in special education they should be able to sit in that same classroom. Inclusion to you means, well, wait, we're breaking it apart and talking about, are we honoring each and every single
That's right.
child? And that's what inclusion means.
Yeah.
Um,
It's about knowing how to adjust sort of our values, our beliefs, and our actions to honor the diversity that sits before us or sits amongst us. Because our philosophy is they sit amongst us.
mhm.
um, that the teacher is not the stage, the sage on the stage. The teacher, in fact, we don't have teachers. They're all certified teachers in this, in the state, but their title is learning coach.
Mm.
And so we look at education as a process of coaching the natural giftedness that's already present within a child,
Mm.
rather than filling them up with facts that may or may not be useful in life. Because the research says that the average individual only uses about 10% of what they actually learned in school. The rest they just forget after the test.
Would you say it's both, like, even if the information was useful, the way that it's being asked to be absorbed is just
Mhm.
unrealistic in the first place?
Yeah,
But
it's
maybe,
very scripted. Our teachers have lost in some ways their voice
mm,
within the current system, and it's heartbreaking to me because I was a teacher in a public school system. I taught special education for 2 years in a public system, and it was back in the 70s. But I've just watched the whole process, and it's very sad for me because something that could be so so wonderful, so joyful, learning for life, has really become learn for the next test and then move forward and hope you do well. like, um,
Is that
and
part of your distinction between I think the distinction you
yeah,
were about to make is education and learning.
yeah, education draws from within. Schooling is forced from without.
Hmm.
And so, I think in many ways we've created a system on a federal level of forced compliance and conformity to very limited mindset.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it's going to show itself. I think it's already showing itself. Um, the critical thinking pieces certainly are not as strong as they're certainly not excellent in my view.
No.
Um, so yeah, for me, it's if you see that a child already has greatness. So one of our tenants at the school, we actually sell T-shirts with this on it, but it says, "Don't try to fix or change me because I'm not broken.
Hmm.
Instead, try to instead understand and teach me because I'm full of greatness."
I like that a lot.
And so if you believe that tenant, then it puts teachers in a very different role.
Hmm.
If you first have to recognize the greatness within the child. And honestly, when my son Corey, who is my youngest, he's in his 30s, but when he was 15, he came home from school and said, "I'm quitting school, Mom." And I said, "Well, the federal government says you're too young to do that, but tell me why you're interested in doing that." And he said, "Because they just don't teach the way life works." And so I actually took both my boys. Brett is a year older than Corey, 15 months older. And I took both of my boys out of the high school after their sophomore year, and I sent them to the community college for the last 2 years of high school.
Hmm. And that seemed to work out okay.
And yeah, just to see their investment, that truly they made the shift from schooling to education
Hmm.
and finding their passion and then moving on from there. So both of those boys graduated with an associate's degree from the college before they had a high school diploma, but all of their courses that they took at the college were counted as advanced placement courses for the high school diploma, which, that's another whole thing. Like, why do we have advanced placement courses? Why can't kids just learn to the degree that they're interested in learning? Why do we group kids by age? Like, why wouldn't it make more sense that we would group kids in multi-age groups by interest?
Hmm.
So there's a lot of questions and things that need to be asked. And I had an opportunity to talk to the Federal Secretary of Education under an administration, and basically, um, you know, I was asking, like, I think the agenda is flawed. Like, you have all this stuff and all this money going into education, trillions and trillions of dollars, but the whole the whole vision is flawed. And so, how do we begin to work in a way that brings about a change that makes sense? And basically, that person said to me, "Jeanine, someday you're just going to accept the fact that education is no longer about the students, it's about results."
They almost I believe you, but I still feel like it can't be real. Like that
Mhm.
can't it couldn't have been so on the nose.
Yeah, it's like I, I hung up on him. It was like I was so frustrated. Like, I was like, "Are you kidding me?" But at that level, it is about results because that's how they get their money.
Hmm.
That's how they get paid from all these corporations is, you buy in and then we make sure that you're taken care of.
Yeah.
Um, so there's some really big issues that I think need to be talked about. And, when we talk about empowerment, Zach, uh, for me, empowerment is about significance. That is part of our training that we do, our in-depth training. One of the concepts we talk about frequently is, that at the end of the day, if you ask this question, like, did every student that came through my path that day, are they leaving me feeling visible, valued, and supported um, for their greatness, not for like how they misbehaved or what kind of a problem they created, but are they all leaving me visible, valued, and supported? Like they were noticed, not praised, but noticed. Like, I noticed today that your day seemed to be a little off. That mustn't feel very well. Is there something you want to talk about? Or I noticed, when the kid next to you dropped the pencil case on the floor, that you got up and offered to help them. Thank you. That's being friendly. So noticing is followed by gratitude. Thank you and appreciation. And through that, kids learn that they have value, that they're significant, they matter, that they're part of a genuine community. And that's really critically important in today's world, because the principle in behavior says any human heart that becomes disconnected from its community has potential to become a weapon of destruction. And so whether it's destructive to it themselves, so in today's world, the self-destruction of addiction, which is very prevalent, or the self-destruction of what we're seeing in depression and suicide, and the highest rate of depression in the last 55 years of the country,
Yeah.
or whether it's I pick up a gun and I go to school and I shoot a teacher that's in Vermont at one of the elementary schools, because that was true a few years back, or I go to a college setting and I slit the throats of two professors in New Hampshire, or I decide that I'm going to take out 21 lives in Sandy Hook in Connecticut, or I'm a workplace shooter. It shows up later on. So I think we have a lot of work to do around community and what is a genuine community. And then once we figure that out, then what is a genuine educational community? And look at the age groups that we're working with. Like, what's a genuine community for infants as opposed to a genuine community for high schoolers and college kids? So I think there's really, for my entire career, all I've tried to do is engage people in these kinds of dialogues. People don't want to engage in those dialogues. They don't want to do that reflection. They just want to be top down. Let me tell you, this is what you need to do. And if you don't do that, you'll be labeled a troublemaker and you probably won't, get a job. But I think it's time for us to start having those dialogues.
You said something that, when you talk about people becoming disconnected from a community, I do see that in real time all the time. I felt that way growing up. And for my part, it made me feel at some time, I don't know a better word, but nihilistic almost. Like, what's the point? And it takes so little, but for a long enough period of time to get that way. And I've noticed that it takes so little, but in a conscious sort of a way for somebody to help you feel connected.
Yeah.
It seems like the most insidious part of that whole thing is that it wouldn't take all that much effort for us as adults, teachers, to reach out and make sure that people are feeling connected. But it seems like there's like an enormous gap in the way of people doing that, or like it's a risk to do that because you're bucking against something. And I don't know if you remember this, but I was at one of your trainings one time and I asked a question about, this is when I was working within the school system, no entrepreneurial anything. And I said, I feel like I'm constantly fighting upstream. Like I'm seeing things go wrong in interactions every moment of the day. And there's only so much calling that out that I feel like I'm able to do. Because like you say, people aren't really interested in the heat of the moment and discussing. And I said, do you have any advice for someone in that situation? And you said, keep doing the right thing. Which at the moment, I'll be honest, I thought, what a cop-out answer. But it's really the only right answer. And I'm curious if you said that specifically to me or because of the context of the way I said it, or if you would say that to everybody in such a shorthand kind of a way.
Yeah. Over the years, I've worked directly with over 4,000 kids. And they've all been kids that have some level of challenge going on. And so that's, it's incredibly rewarding to do that work. And over the years, people have asked me, like, what is the best strategy of all the strategies, like, what's the best strategy? And my answer has always been the same. The strategy, the right strategy, is the one that reaches the heart and the mind of the child. There is no one right strategy.
Right.
But there's a lot of people out there that have their systems and let you know that there's a limited pool of the right strategy. And if you just do this, we call it the cookbook approach, then you'll get the outcomes you're looking for. There is
Right.
no one right strategy. There isn't a strategy that works for the same child at different points in the day, because the sensory system, which is the foundation to regulation, is at different places at points in the day.
Right.
And so, for me, it's always about just do the next right thing. And my definition of that is, what is going to reach the heart and mind of this child or this adult, given where they're at this moment in time? And in order to answer that, it requires a lot of reflective work, which again, the current system appears not to afford people the time to be able to do. It's like, don't be a thinking human being, just follow the script. And so, when we do our leadership with insight, it's really based in four skills. And the first set of skills is reflective practice, knowing how to ask the questions that get you to that level of excellence that we may be looking for. The second is to dialogue. And so to have conversations with people and to be open in those conversations to all voices. And, one of my statements that I came out with probably about 5 years ago, because I was just sick of hearing people say the truth. You just have to do the truth. But what is true for one person may not be true for another. And so whose truth are you talking about?
Right.
And just because you have a belief and that belief is very strong and you think that's the truth, it's your truth, but it may not be the truth. And it's only through dialogue that we get to that sort of collaborative place of understanding the truth.
And that's age old wisdom, right?
Yes.
Just dialectic gets you to your first
Just
and second
talk,
person.
storytelling. Goes through every culture, through all the ages. Like, what happened to that? Do we want to hear people's stories? Are we too busy in our self-serving lifestyles of today to even notice that there's other human beings that have stories, and some of those stories have suffering?
I know that you're right in the middle of talking about your skills. I have to bring something else up. Now, people who are listening will know, because now this is I'll admit that I stole this from you. I stole a bunch of things from you, but this is one of them. And I've mentioned it on the podcast before, that I have a rule, at least for myself, that anytime any kid ever asks me for a push on the swing, that I always do it. That statement that you gave stuck with me forever. My daughter now,
Mm-hmm.
there are things around, like, she'll want me to run. She likes to run laps around the house because she's 2.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime she ever asks me to, I always do it. Yeah. It's such a change in perspective from being centered around myself and what my needs are, to knowing that I have a responsibility to meeting the needs and building relationships with the kids that I work with.
Right. And that's key. Like, there's all different, visions or philosophies about behavior, just like there are philosophies about education. You can be Waldorf, Montessori, nature, but you could be whatever. And that's true in behavior as well. And there are some philosophies that believe like functions are all that matter in behavior. My experience, and basically when you go back 2,000 years and you study behavior, what you find out is that needs are the motivators of all behavior. Needs. And so I spent a lot of my work trying to identify different lenses of needs. What are the lenses of needs, and how do we begin to meet needs? And what's the difference between a need and a want? Because in today's world, kids are very focused on wants, and they feel very entitled to their wants. So you better give it to me, and don't ask me to be, sacrifice anything, and don't ask me to be accountable. You just give it to me, because don't you see how special I am? Like, just give it to me. That's called entitlement. So, um, you know, I think what you said is, swinging may look like a want for a child, but a child that is incredibly unregulated, swinging is linear movement, and linear movement is a way for children to regulate the brain. And so it may not be just a want. It just appears to be that because the kid is demanding to have that happen. But the reality is there's a need behind that.
Right. And no matter what, that's exactly it. The thing is that I will easily rationalize in my mind that I don't want to do something, and maybe it's for my own reasons, but I would always rationalize it as this is just something that this person wants or thinks that they want, but they don't really need it. And what a lot of the little parables and interesting things you say help me do is to look broader than that and say, who's to say that this is not something that they need?
Yeah. And so you could, there's a thing in behavior that says you can ignore behavior. The problem is, if it's true that needs are the drivers to behavior, then really you're ignoring the need. Because the behavior is not the problem. It's just a symptom of the unsolved problem, which is the unmet need. And so I think you have to get beyond, like, if we just give kids biscuits like we do dogs, like we give them star tickets and tell them they can come to pizza parties, and we continue to do that, you're going to have a very simplistic mindset that they will learn, which is, as long as I can manipulate you to my outcome.
So I'm glad you mentioned this. So in some ways it's like you're old school, but it's not that you're a behavior, like a Skinner behaviorist or something like that, but it's that you want kids to be able to use the language and the communication to be able to articulate whether it's that there's a thing that they need or if there's a thing that they want, and ask you in a reasonable way how to get it, knowing that. And when the kids you're working with, obviously, so often have challenges doing that. So you don't want kids to just be, how did you say? You don't want kids to just expect that the things that they want happen for them. You also don't want kids' needs to be ignored. So we'll talk a little bit. I started you there, but we talk a little bit about how you draw that difference for them and with them.
Yeah, I mean, when sometimes I come directly and say, what do you need right now? But you have to help kids at an early age understand the difference between needs and wants. And so basically a need by definition is, something that if you had to live without it, you can't reach your full potential. And so when a kid is saying, but I need a candy bar, I'm pretty sure you can grow up to be a healthy human being. In fact, you'll probably do that faster if you don't eat a lot of candy. And so one thing that we do at the school, which, if you've been around me, we do a lot of work with temperament, and we use the DISC model of temperament. And I generated a lot of tools and have the copyright to tools for kids around temperament. But we start at the age of 3 at our school with the temperament. And so we do a project at our school, which is superheroes with our 3 and 4-year-olds. And so while most programs out there in early childhood are discouraging superheroes in a classroom, we bring superheroes in, except we connect it to their temperament. So I'll just give you an example. When my granddaughter was 3 years old, she's 7 now, but when she was 3 and at the school, she came home one day and I happened to be babysitting her younger sister. And she was like, she calls me Bunga, and she said, "Hey, Bunga, did you know that I'm a superhero?" And I said, "Really, Kendall? You're a superhero, babe?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "How do you know that?" And she said, "Well, we were talking about it today." Like, I'm just paraphrasing. These aren't the exact words. And so I said to her, "So what type of superhero are you? Are you like Spider-Man? Are you Batman? Are you Wonder Woman? Like, what kind of superhero are you?" And she said, "I am an S-type superhero." And I said, "Wow, what does that mean, Kendall?" And she said, "Well, I just am an S-type superhero." And I said, "Okay, so what kinds of superpowers does an S-type superhero have? What's your superpower?" Because all superheroes have a superpower. So, Superman is faster than a speeding bullet and more powerful than a locomotive. And Spider-Man can do webbing. And so what's your superpower? And she said, Bunga, my superpower is that I have the power of kindness. And I said, really? So an S superhero is kind? And she said, yes. She said, Bunga, I am the keeper of the animals in the forest. And we have a picture of her literally with a mask on, with a cape. She's out in the forest with her arms like this, and her foot sort of up, like she dug her heel in. And the caption says, the keeper of the animals and the forest.
How old
And
was she at this time?
she was 3, almost 4. And then she came home a few days later and she said, Yasser, he's not a S superhero, Bunga. And I said, well, what kind of superhero is Yasser? She said, he's a D-type superhero. He's not very kind, but he has a lot of power. And so we teach our kids through the DISC model about superheroes, and it goes on. So by the time they're in 2nd grade, they start to identify who other people are. Because they've worked with the idea of them being a superhero, and this is who I am, and this is who Yasser is, and this is who, and they can now start to observe in some very skilled way. And so by the time they hit 3rd and 4th grade, we had a new learning coach come in, and the first thing the kids asked him was, what's your DISC letter? And he didn't have any idea what they were talking about. And one of the kids said, well, you're definitely not a C.
Messy desk. Yeah.
See, for me, that's teaching for life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's different than a social skills group where I learn how to say hi. And I learned the script of social, the social scripts for certain environments.
Yeah.
That's teaching life.
So, I have 2 questions about that model. One is, well, of course, just the idea that someone can start basing who they are in an overwhelmingly positive way, but a realistic way at the same time through this archetypal sort of analysis of themselves that you can do at 2 or 3 years old.
Mm-hmm.
It's brilliant. And so how do you make sure that people use that idea of who they are as something that can extend well into the future rather than, let's say, pigeonholing themselves into a category that they can't escape from or something like that?
So we start off with, when you teach temperament, you start off with type. So type is just 1 letter. But within the DISC model, there's 4 letters, D, I, S, and C. That's where the acronym comes from. And we teach that there's a blend of all 4 of those. But little kids, it's too hard for them to figure out the blend. We don't start teaching the blends until the kids are in the middle elementary years. So in my blend, I am a CDS blend, and all of those come into play and influence patterns of behavior. But you always start off with type first. And the idea behind the teaching of temperament, which is really challenging because one of the scripted curriculums that's out there in early childhood is, now labeling kids as being fearful and feisty, and and that's a label. And so one of the ideas that we talk about and what makes us different in the way we use temperament is that it's never to be used as a label. It's never to be used as a weapon against somebody. It's not meant to pigeonhole or stereotype. It's supposed to be a tool for understanding.
Right.
And when we understand, who the greatness of who a person is, and that's one part of their greatness, then our responsibility is to adjust to honor that greatness. It's not to fix the other person to be convenient for my system or me as a teacher. It's how do I adjust to reach the heart and mind of this child? And so that's what we mean by honoring. Like, the people are center. That's what matters. The people, not the curriculum, not the outcomes. Like, we like to get those, and we do, because we've had children that have aged out of the program. And we have one child that left, and when they did the testing to see where he would be placed in the traditional system, he was 2 years ahead academically for his age. So we have a child that right now is second grade age, but is in the third and fourth grade classroom and doing seventh grade work.
Hmm.
So his mom just said to me, so when are you going to start to build the high school? Because he's going to need it in a couple of years.
Right. So what's the idea behind that? Like someone comes from your school and then into high school. Do you think that they're at least sufficiently prepared for whatever that time of their
Yeah.
life brings?
Yeah, for the kids that have left, they truly have excelled, exceeded what the benchmarks are. So as an independent school, you have to demonstrate to get accredited, and we are accredited. You have to demonstrate that what you do either meets or exceeds the benchmarks of the federal government. And so we exceed. So I'll just give you an example. The person that was responsible for our accreditation, which was 2 years into the program, was the assistant superintendent of schools for the public school system of the town that we're in. And so we prepared, and I brought him all, all of our webs, and I brought him all kinds of stuff and asked him if he had any questions. And he said, no, I don't have any questions. I'll deliver it to the school committee. They'll take a look at it, blah, 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 blah. So we went through this process, and then he said, so the last part is, so you went through all of that with flying colors. The only thing they want to know is, how do you teach foreign languages? I said, if you understand the diversity of our school, like English is a foreign language for some of them, and for others, Arabic is a foreign language, and so we're just in immersion, like we're in immersion. So when we answered that, then he said, so the final step is that I have to come to the school and I have to be part of to see if, in fact, what you told us is actually true. I said, sure. So he came in. He walked around really quiet, and I kept saying to him, like, is there any information you need? Can I show you how we do, like, the work sampling? Can I show you how we do, the sharing of what's happening on a day-to-day basis with the families, because we have a technology program that we use that literally we're posting and sending information to the parents in real time. And he was like, no, I'm okay. That's okay. It looks okay. And I kept saying, I'm just here. Like, if you need to ask questions, I'd be happy to help you. If you'd like to sit and talk to any of the learning coaches, if you'd like to talk to some of the children, like, we're an open book. Just let us know what you need. And he looked at me and he whispered it, and he said, I'm done here, Jeanine. He said, you will have full accreditation within the next 2 weeks. He said, honestly, if I wasn't the assistant superintendent of schools, my children would attend here. And so I was like, okay, so they're in a traditional system because of your job title? Like,
Yeah,
it doesn't
that's
make any sense.
bizarre
But
statements.
the fortunate part is that system is a very strong system within that model. So that's the reason we chose that town, because they are a strong system, and we knew we would have to partner with them. And it's been an incredible partnership working with them. So we are at the point now where we're getting ready to expand. So I was in Florida a while back, and talking to some folks down there about beginning a school there. Talked to some folks in Texas. We're talking to some folks in Washington State right now about things that we can be doing out on the West Coast, and bringing the model out. But
I know you've flirted with the idea of starting one in Vermont too. What went on with that? Because I feel like
what
I
on
need you
with
here.
that is there's I met with 2 people that had schools that had their own programs. So they had early childhood programs, and they continue to have early childhood programs. And we created a credentialing, which is called child honoring schools. So there's 49 sort of measures of excellence within the model that we provide. And I sat with these 2 individuals, and so one of them expanded out and created an elementary school, and that's up in West something Vermont, Westford, Vermont, I guess, somewhere past Essex.
Sounds right.
in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And then the early childhood program that we were working with has adopted the philosophy for early childhood, and they have two centers that are child honoring centers.
So that's two ways that you could sort of permeate. Is one, you could actually build a school and run a school in a different state. The other is that you can sort of, in an official sort of a way, extend your philosophy to different schools. And then there's that unofficial way, I guess is the third, that you just continue the dialogue and help and
Right.
connect with people and hope that it spreads as much as it can.
Yeah, and I think what people might want to know is, like, we don't do things that are in conflict with, like, Common Core. We don't do things
Right.
that are in conflict with state licensing. We just exceed that. It's not, I don't have any need for conflict and confrontation in my life. Like, I'm not trying to be a troublemaker. I'm just trying to honor children and give them a lifelong education and get away from schooling.
So you're not a burn it down kind of a person. You like to do the courtesy act of trying to fix things first, or
Yeah, I'm not,
exceeding things first.
yeah, I'm not a
Yeah.
militant. Like, I mean, maybe I was in my younger days, but I don't have the energy for that. It sucks the energy right out of me. Like, I
Yeah.
just want to use my energy for positive result. And I want to be around people that are genuine people. I don't want to be around people that are invested in image. I want people of integrity. And honestly, I just want to have dialogue, because I think if we have dialogue, it's going to produce something incredible. Like, if you're going to count on the federal government to change the system of education, or any system for that matter, it's just common sense. If the system works for the person, they're not going to invest in changing it.
Yeah.
Like, it's just common sense. So you're putting your eggs in the wrong basket. The people we need to be, conversing with are the people that the system isn't working for. Because those are the people that have the motivation to adjust the system. And I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater either. I think there's some incredible stuff. I'm a product of public schools. I'm a product of a state college. And so, I don't think we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I just think we need to reassess, what has changed culturally. And is what we're doing just putting a new dress on an old system that can't be reformed because too much has changed culturally, and then saying we have education reform and equality system.
Right.
But it's the same system, because the people that are benefiting from it are not going to change it. It's as simple as that.
So I left a few threads open that I didn't let you finish before, that I feel like deserve the attention. You were mentioning 4 basic skills that you use, that you identify when you're doing your work, and I think I left you hanging on 2.
Yeah. So we do reflection and dialogue, but the other 2 things that we incorporate into the leadership is appreciative inquiry. So recognizing that all voices matter, and giving a platform to all voices in those dialogues that we have. And that people have different truths. And just because it's your truth, it's not the truth. And then the last is progressive confrontation. So knowing how to address in an assertive way, so that we hopefully don't get to this place of conflict, and particularly conflict of values, which are almost impossible to resolve.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. You just, yeah. Oh, well, we could go into that for a long time.
Whether it's parenting, or whether it's providing care, or whether it's education, people's values are very deep seated. And so, I think the likelihood of changing those, I mean, if you put it in a political world, which I try to stay away from, but I don't think if you're a staunch Democrat that you're going to embrace anything that's Republican or even moderate Democrat. It's just very well deep-seated stuff. And so, I don't think that, there's lots of conflicts of values. I mean, all the wars that we've experienced are related to conflicts of values. People literally will go to their death for their values.
Yeah.
Mm. So I don't want to get into all of that. I just want to figure out, like, if a child has a need for us to adjust, how do we do that effectively? You don't have to believe what they believe. You don't have to live there and become a different person. You just visit there for a while, so you reach the child and then you move on.
So we could do this for, I feel like I could have you on the phone if we were physically able for a month or so, but I want to honor the fact that we had an hour set out. So before we sign off, first, is there anything that you think is salient to the kind of conversation we were having that we missed or we breezed through too rapidly?
I mean, there's a lot of things depending upon what place you want to go. I think the bottom line for me is how do you create optimal functioning from a science point of view, and then how do you develop the skills, and how do you develop the attitudes, more importantly. So how do you balance the art and the science? Because I know a lot of science, and I know a lot of people that know a lot of science, but they can't apply any of it. So how do you become a person that has the art, the people side, the application of what it is that we're doing? And how do we do that in a way that honors everybody, no matter who we interact with? I mean, in today's world, we're talking about all the isms, racism, just all the labels that are being thrown around. And I'm not saying that those things don't exist, but the reality is that a lot of that is connected to not feeling honored.
Agreed.
And maybe that's the conversation we need to start having, instead of here's a new curriculum on diversity. Maybe, because the first curriculum on diversity was called Teaching Tolerance. That never made any sense to me. That was in the 80s. Like, people don't want to be tolerated. They want to be understood.
Right.
They want to be respected. They want to be honored. And when people are honored in a way that they feel that their needs are met, you don't have people take to the streets. You don't have people that show up at a Capitol. You don't have people that, I mean, all the ills of today go back to honoring. We've become a country and a culture that only honors what is self-serving. We've become a culture of entitlement. And so I think it's our educational system that needs to look closely at that, because we can't afford to raise another generation and educate another generation the way we're going.
Exactly.
We can't afford to do that. There's too much life lost.
I completely agree. And most of the people I talk to, if I say in a word, what is the thing that needs to be reformed, or what is the thing that needs to happen in order to save all, or whatever. Education is usually the word that people use. People cop to that. I think people understand that. So thank you. Thanks for everything you're doing. And I want to send people toward your work. So where can people find out about you, sign up for the trainings that you do, which I guess unfortunately you do online now too,
I
not
do.
just in person.
Yeah. So my website, my personal website, is JanineFitzgerald.com. The school is thefitzgeraldinstitute.org. And then most of the communication happens through the websites, but my email is T as in Tom, P as in Patrick, and then FITZ, like my last name, Fitz, 45@AOL.com. And if you wanted to call my business number, it's 978-413-4372.
I'll make sure that I link to everything and get that out there. Thank you so much for your time today. Really great seeing you, Jeanine.
Yeah, same here. Thanks for the invite.